You're sitting across from your father at a family dinner, the man who gave you everything, who built an empire that spans decades. And you look him straight in the eye and tell him to write you out of his will. Completely, forever. Sounds impossible. Right, like something out of a Hollywood drama where family loyalty trumps everything else. Well, tonight on Starwire Daily, we're diving deep into one of the most shocking family decisions to rock the wrestling world in years. Because according to sources close to the Hogan family, that's exactly what Brooke Hogan did. Welcome back to Starwire Daily, where we uncover the stories behind the headlines that matter. I'm your host, and tonight we're peeling back the layers of a story that goes far beyond just money and inheritance. This is about legacy, about family bonds tested by fame, and about a daughter who made a choice that left even Hollywood insiders speechless. Now, before we get into the meat of this story, let me paint you a picture of the Hogan dynasty. We're talking about Hulk Hogan Terry Bollea to his friends, a man whose name alone is worth millions. The Hulkster didn't just wrestle his way to the top. He built a brand that transcended sports entertainment. From his iconic yellow and red persona to his reality TV empire, from restaurant chains to merchandise deals that span the globe, we're looking at a fortune that industry experts estimate somewhere in the ballpark of $25 to $30 million. And at the center of this empire for the longest time was his daughter Brooke. Born Brooke Ellen Bollea, she grew up in the spotlight, literally. While most kids were worried about homework and school dances, Brooke was navigating red carpets and recording studios. She released her debut album Undiscovered in 2006, and, while it didn't exactly set the charts on fire, it showed the world that she was determined to carve out her own path, separate from her father's shadow. But here's where the story gets interesting, and frankly, heartbreaking. Because being a Hogan, as we've learned over the years, comes with a price that extends far beyond the glitz and glamour we see on our screens. Let's rewind to 2007, a year that would forever change the Hogan family dynamic. Hulk and Linda Hogan's marriage was crumbling in the most public way possible. We're talking about a divorce that played out like a daytime soap opera, complete with accusations, counter-accusations, and enough drama to fuel a dozen reality shows. The divorce proceedings weren't just messy, they were absolutely brutal. Linda walked away with what many considered a staggering settlement. We're talking about 30% of Hulk's liquid assets, plus the waterfront mansion in Bellicor Bluffs that was worth several $1,000,000. But more than the money, the divorce created fractures in the family that would take years to even begin healing. Now, here's something most people don't know about Brooke during this time. While the world was watching her parents tear each other apart in court, she was quietly dealing with her own struggles. The music career that was supposed to launch her into superstardom, it was stalling. The reality show, Hogan Knows Best, that had made her a household name, it was ending, and suddenly, Brooke found herself in that uniquely difficult position of being famous, but not quite famous enough. Wealthy, but not wealthy in her own right. Fast forward through the years, and we see Brooke trying to establish her independence. She dabbled in country music, tried her hand at different entertainment ventures, even explored opportunities outside of the entertainment industry altogether. But here's the thing about being a Hogan. The name opens doors, but it also creates expectations. And sometimes, those expectations become chains. Which brings us to the bombshell that's rocking Hollywood tonight. According to sources who spoke to entertainment insiders, and these are people with direct knowledge of the Hogan family's private affairs, Brooke made a decision that stunned even her closest friends. She reportedly asked her father to remove her from his will entirely. Think about that for a moment. This isn't a daughter who was cut off by an angry parent. This isn't about a family feud or some dramatic falling out. This was Brooke's choice. A deliberate, calculated decision to walk away from what could potentially be millions of dollars. But why? Why would someone willingly give up their inheritance? Especially when we're talking about the kind of money that could set up not just her, but her children and their children for generations to come. The answer, according to our sources, is both simpler and more complex than you might expect. It all comes down to something that money can't buy. Peace of mind, you see. When you're in line to inherit a substantial fortune, especially one that's been built in the public eye, you inherit more than just assets. You inherit the complexity, the business entanglements, the potential legal issues, and yes, the family dynamics that come with that money. Think about what Brooke witnessed during her parents' divorce. She saw firsthand how money, or the fight over money, can turn family members into adversaries. She watched as lawyers dissected every aspect of her father's business empire. As private family matters became public court records, as the very wealth that was supposed to provide security became a source of endless conflict. And here's something that really puts this into perspective. Brooke has a half-brother, Nick Hogan, from her father's side. Nick, as you'll remember, had his own share of struggles, including that devastating car accident in 2007 that left his friend John Graziano permanently disabled. The legal and financial ramifications of that incident alone created years of litigation and stress for the entire family. Now imagine being Brooke, watching all of this unfold and thinking about the future. Imagine knowing that someday she might find herself in a similar position, fighting over money. Dealing with business complications she didn't create. Managing assets she didn't build. All while trying to maintain family relationships that are already strained, according to our sources. Brooke's decision wasn't made in anger or resentment. Quite the opposite, actually. It was made out of love. Love for her father, and love for her own peace of mind. By removing herself from the inheritance equation, she's essentially saying, "Dad, I want us to have a relationship that's about more than money. I want to build my own life, create my own success, and when we're together, I want it to be about family, not finances." Now, I have to tell you, when I first heard this story, my initial reaction was disbelief. In a world where people fight tooth and nail over inheritance, where families are torn apart by wills and estates, here's someone voluntarily walking away from millions. It seems almost too noble to be true, but the more I've thought about it, the more it makes sense, especially when you consider Brooke's personality and her journey over the past decade. This is someone who has consistently tried to establish her independence, who has worked to build her own career separate from her father's legacy. This decision, dramatic as it is actually consistent with everything we know about who Brooke Hogan is as a person. There's also something to be said about the timing of this decision. Hulk Hogan is 69 years old, and while he's still very much active and vibrant, he's at an age where estate planning becomes a practical consideration. By making this choice now, while everyone is healthy and relationships are good, Brooke is preventing potential future conflicts. But let's talk about what this means for the Hogan legacy, because that's a conversation worth having. When we think about celebrity inheritances, we usually think about children continuing their parents' work, managing their estates, preserving their legacies. Look at families like the Presleys with Graceland, or how Michael Jackson's children are involved in managing his estate. With Brooke stepping back, it raises questions about what happens to the Hogan empire when Hulk is no longer around to manage it. Who takes over the business decisions? Who manages the brand deals, the licensing agreements, the various ventures that keep the Hogan name profitable? Of course, there's still Nick Hogan and Hulk's current wife, Jennifer McDaniel, who he married in 2010. The dynamics of inheritance could still be complex, but Brooke's decision certainly simplifies at least one aspect of future estate planning. I think what really strikes me about this story is how it reflects a broader conversation about wealth, family, and happiness in Hollywood. We've seen so many celebrity families torn apart by money. Think about the battles over James Brown's estate, or the ongoing disputes in the Jackson family, or even the complex inheritance issues surrounding Prince's estate. Brooke's decision represents something different. It's a recognition that sometimes the cost of wealth, emotional, psychological, relational, can be higher than the wealth itself is worth. And that takes a level of maturity and self-awareness that's honestly refreshing to see in Hollywood. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Some critics might say this is all a publicity stunt, that there's no way someone would actually walk away from millions, that this is just another way to generate headlines and keep the Hogan name in the news. But here's the thing. If this were just a publicity stunt, don't you think they'd be talking about it more publicly? This information came from sources close to the family, not from a press release or a social media announcement. If anything, the Hogans seem to be trying to keep this quiet, which suggests it's a genuine family decision rather than a calculated PR move. There's also the practical reality that Brooke is now in her 30s. She's had time to establish her own life, her own career, her own financial situation. This isn't a 20-something making an emotional decision. This is a mature woman who has thought through the implications and decided that her relationship with her father is more important than any inheritance. And you know what? There's something beautiful about that. In a world where we constantly hear about children who only talk to their wealthy parents when they need money, or families that are held together solely by financial obligation, here's a daughter who is essentially saying, "I love you enough to take money completely off the table." I imagine that conversation between Brooke and Hulk was incredibly emotional. Picture it. A daughter telling her father that she doesn't want his money, that she wants to earn her own way, that their relationship is worth more to her than any inheritance. And a father having to grapple with the fact that his daughter is choosing love over money, family over fortune. It also speaks to something we don't often talk about in celebrity culture: the burden of inherited wealth. Yes, it's a privilege, and yes, most people would gladly take on that burden. But there's a psychological weight that comes with knowing your financial security depends on someone else's death. There's pressure to maintain relationships that might be complicated or strained. There's the constant wondering whether people are interested in you for you, or for what you might someday inherit by stepping away from the inheritance. Brooke is freeing herself from all of that. She's saying, whatever I achieve, whatever life I build, it's going to be mine. Not because of who my father is, not because of what he left me, but because of who I am and what I've earned. Now, I should mention that we don't know all the details of this decision. We don't know if it's completely permanent or if there are any conditions or exceptions. We don't know how other family members have reacted or what the full implications might be. What we do know is that this decision has been made, and it's already having an impact on how people view the Hogan family dynamic. What this story really highlights is the complexity of family relationships when fame and fortune are involved. It's easy for those of us on the outside to judge, to say what we would or wouldn't do in similar circumstances. But the reality is that celebrity families face pressures and challenges that most of us can't even imagine. Brooke's decision, whatever the full reasoning behind it, represents a choice to prioritize relationships over money, peace over profit, love over legacy. And in a world where we're constantly bombarded with stories about greed and family dysfunction, that's actually pretty inspiring. It also raises questions about our own relationships with money and family. How many of us have seen money cause problems in our own families? How many of us have watched inheritance disputes tear apart people who used to love each other? Brooke's decision might seem extreme, but it's also a powerful statement about what really matters in life. As we wrap up tonight's story, I can't help but think about the larger implications of Brooke's choice. In an industry where everything is often about money, who's getting the best deals, who's worth the most, who's inheriting what, Here's someone who is actively choosing to step away from that game. Will she regret this decision someday? Maybe. Will it change her relationship with her father for the better? Time will tell. What we do know is that Brooke Hogan has made a choice that very few people would make, and regardless of whether we agree with it or not, we have to respect the courage it took to make it. Because, at the end of the day, this isn't really a story about money or inheritance or celebrity wealth. It's a story about a daughter who loves her father enough to walk away from millions just to make sure their relationship stays pure. And in Hollywood, where everything has a price tag, that kind of love is pretty much priceless. So what do you think about Brooke's decision? Would you make the same choice if you were in her position? Have you seen money cause problems in your own family? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because this is the kind of story that really makes you think about what matters most in life. If you found tonight's deep dive as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us continue to bring you these behind-the-scenes stories that go beyond the headlines. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we've got so many more incredible celebrity stories coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next. Until next time, this has been StarWire Daily, reminding you that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what celebrities have, but about what they're willing to give up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.